Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I'd like to now thank Jamie for that wonderful presentation and tech talk on shifting to proactive intelligence response. What a great talk that was. And now it is time to move on to our technology panel discussion on IT-OT convergence for effective industrial cyber security. Well, we're later to be joined by our eminent panelists, but first up, I'd like to talk about the topic a little more. IoT as a main concern of cyber vulnerability, VPN, identity management, and other technologies to mitigate industrial cyber threats, and industrial OT, ICS, SCADA, cybersecurity system and solutions for effective enterprises are the subtopics we're looking at aiming at talking on. We're joined by our eminent panelists. First up, Professor Dr. Roberto D. Pietro, the Professor of Cybersecurity, HBKU, College of Science and Engineering, Doha-Qatar. Well, Professor Roberto is currently a full-time professor of cybersecurity at the HBKU College of Science and Engineering, Doha-Qatar, leading the effort to establish a world-class research and innovation center in cybersecurity. Thank you so much, Professor Roberto, for joining us today live.
Thank you to you.
Pleasure having you, sir. Also, ladies and gentlemen, joining us now on the screen is going to be Javed Habib, a regional head of plant controls, lifecycle management, and ICS cybersecurity, Engie UAE. Javed provides technical support to O&M teams on 25 power plus desalination plants and renewable energy plants across the MESCAT related to his area of expertise. Javed's area of focus is industrial control systems, cybersecurity of industrial control systems, and associated lifecycle management. Thank you so much, Javed, for joining us today.
Thank you, Bhavna.
Joining our two panelists is also Samson Tingbani, the head of technology transformation, DHL Global Forwarding UAE. Well, Samson is somebody who enjoys working with others to drive technology transformation in logistics, supply chain management, enterprise resource planning, and operations management through continuing to set up and run businesses in both emerging markets and matured markets. Thank you so much, Samson, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Also joining is Tabrez Surve, the regional head, security head VMware SEMEA. Tabrez is a regional security head for SEMEA at VMware. Tabrez is somebody who brings with him 2 decades of experience in selling cybersecurity solutions within enterprises. Thank you so much, Tabrez, for joining us.
Pleasure for being part of such an elite panelist here.
Pleasure is all us. And ladies and gentlemen, joining us as the moderator is Dr. Viktor Polic, the Chief Information Security Officer, International Labour Organization, Switzerland. Well, Dr. Viktor is the Chief Information Security Officer at the International Labour Organization, but his information communications technology career spans different roles across financial, humanitarian, and public sector organizations. Thank you so much, Dr. Viktor, for joining us.
Thank you for having me today.
With this, the panel is all yours.
Thank you, Bhavana. Thank you for introducing this distinguished panel, and thank you everyone for participating and joining me today, and all our eminent audience on this very important topic. So maybe let me give a little bit of an overhead how I personally viewed the convergence, as we were talking about convergence of information technology and operational technology over decades. So if we quickly look back through last 4 decades of this convergence, we can say that, well, for the most of 90s, it was the isolated 2 worlds of isolated industrial control systems and operational technology, and information technology was in its own silo. Nevertheless, when we look at the threats that were targeting that specific niche industry, we've already had reports back in 2001 of attacks and cyber attacks on industrial systems. For example, the attack in California utility power grid, and then after, of course, convergence of telecom and computer networks into what we see today as a mostly digital, interconnected, highly interconnected world, when it started after 2000. And with the emergence of a year 2010, I would say, was basically the first convergence, strong convergence of these two worlds when networks converged into IP networks from very hybrid systems and platforms. And then in the meantime, we had first cyber weapons. We had famous Stuxnet in 2007 attacking nuclear research and development and defense systems of Iran. We had actually several versions of Stuxnet attacking those networks from 2007 to 2010. And then, of course, after 2010, in the convergence of cyber threats, actually, I would say, moved much more rapidly than the convergence of industry. Of course, we have to mention 2012 Shamoon attack on oil and gas in Saudi Aramco and Qatar, Rasgas, and then coming back 2016, 2017, 18 new versions. I'm sure that the whole audience here is very aware of those. And then what is the last decade? So we call it Industry 4.0, right? So the convergence of everything together, IoTs, cloud computing, mobile communications. We're talking about 5G, even 6G technologies these days that are going to be a lot of differentiators and enablers in all the industries, notably in industrial control systems. And so we have attacks on supply chain. We have attacks on SolarWind last year. We have attacks on Kaseya just a few days ago. We had colonial pipeline attacks. So it's a huge asymmetric world of threats against defenses. Yet the values of these systems that we're going to talk, and in each panel participant here has very responsible roles to defend those systems, actually bring a huge value, not only to the companies or public sector organizations, but also to the society. So we've seen that the impact on colonial actually had a huge impact on the price of crude oil. Brent market went up. So, and that actually forced defenders to consider huge investments into these areas. But now back to the panel and to hear these questions. So I would start with Mr. Habib, who is from the energy sector. So Mr. Habib, in the industrial and operational technology and industrial control systems and SCADA systems, what do you see as the most effective solutions and platforms? What is the approach that you would highlight on defenses and controls against actual threats?
Thank you for allowing me to participate here, and I'm pleased to be part of this panel. The IoT, and like you said, Doctor, that the convergence in itself has brought many challenges, and therefore these challenges need to be addressed. And we certainly are on a very fast pace in search of the solutions to actually secure our OT network. With my background being all my life spent in the OT networks, I perhaps do not have adequate expertise on the IT side, but I can speak from the point of view of the OT network. The solutions, the OT network has been slow in adopting to cybersecurity, slower than IT, because historically the OT control systems all came proprietary, and there was no threat for associated with it with the cybersecurity, because the controls, the proprietary operating systems were specific to specific vendors and OEMs. All the story changed when we started adopting the open systems, operating systems from Microsoft, when we started using in the OT networks. This is where all the convergence came. And this is where we were open to all the threats that the IT system has been open to conventionally. Was that necessary? Absolutely, because we could not have been living forever in a silo, and we would have OT network would have not been able to be instrumental in driving a digital transformation to let the businesses get advantage of all the tools based on the artificial intelligence and big data. So the OT system will have to provide all the operating data to actually the algorithms to actually benefit. So this is where we had to merge, and therefore the solutions are definitely needed to protect the OT environment, because OT environment is the one very prime and very attractive target, like you said, Dr. Polic, that most of your incidents.
Thank you, Mr. Habib. So for your very insightful intervention on this very important subject. Actually, you mentioned something that brings me to the point of maybe raising another aspect on more about vulnerabilities, actually, because you mentioned when operating systems were adopted, mostly IT-oriented operating systems. You mentioned in particular Microsoft Windows and related operating system. So the new vulnerabilities domain actually opened into this industry. So we've actually seen recently, for example, that just reminded me that Microsoft, through mergers and acquisitions, acquired expertise into this area of production of control systems, actually through acquisition of CyberX, and now integrating that into their Defender for Azure portfolio of products. So obviously they value highly the importance of defense, integrated defense, cyber defense platforms for the industry. Now, are they actually able to compete and respond to all the requirements of the industry? That's the question which I would like to then move on. Maybe before moving on to other panelists, just ask you one other question. You mentioned actually adopting the risk-based approach to actually evaluate, I imagine, factors of risks, right? Threats, impact, and vulnerabilities. So would you just like to elaborate a bit on that, Mr.
Right, thank you. I think it's a very relevant question to adopt which strategy you adopt when you want to secure your OT networks, and that is very eloquently related to what the subject we discussed in the first question. So the risk-based approach, I will jot down quickly a few key points. So first I will talk about what are the prerequisites for a risk-based approach, what are the key inputs for it, and what is the results. So in the end, when I discuss the results, you will know why we adopt a risk-based approach. So my apologies for a little bit upside down. It fits well with the subject here. Right. So what are the key prerequisites for adopting a risk-based approach? Is you have to have the knowledge of your infrastructure, your OT infrastructure. The footprint you have to know. You have to know all the components. You have to have inventory. Once you have the full infrastructure, you need to know what are the risks associated with each component, how vulnerable they are, how exposed they are to the external threats. Then knowledge of how critical is your business to community, like you discussed, Dr. Polic, that the pipeline incident where it was extremely having an impact on the quality of life of the people, the business, and the economic life of the people. So you have to know what are you producing, what are your product and services that can have impact on revenues, quality of life or life. And then the key inputs that will go into adopting a risk-based approach is you have to know your threat landscape. Who are your enemies? Who can attack you? Are the amateurs who are playing with the cybersecurity as a hobby, or these are the country supported armies that are your enemies? You have to know the comprehensive inventory, like I said, and then the consistent risk evaluation methodology. Once you know what is the risk evaluation, then you evaluate your risk based on your inventory.
So if I may conclude, Mr. Habib, the risk approach framework actually that you are highlighting on its importance would actually be from the two worlds, if I may interpret in that way, the world of industrial control systems that are operational technology. Therefore, the risk that they're looking at is more about process-oriented risks, while in the IT, we traditionally look at the risk frameworks from data protection. And I think that's one of the possible gaps that we're observing while this convergence is actually taking so much time. So maybe thank you for your interventions. Maybe we can now move on to hear other panelists actually. Maybe let me ask now from the control point of view, Mr. Tingbani from DHL, you would like to share some views on the industrial cyber threats, but also technologies to mitigate those threats?
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. So at DHL, we focus a lot on security. In fact, all the way to our global CEO, security of our infrastructure, security of our software, security of our operations is key. Primarily because we are in the business of connecting people, so it's a people business logistics, right? We also move a lot of very sensitive cargo. We involved heavily in the movement of vaccines. We involved heavily in the movement of temperature-controlled cargo. We're also in the business of moving automotive equipment, which are also very essential in other parts of the supply chain. When we look at infrastructure, we also can't forget the Internet of Things. Now, Internet of Things is seeming something which is very new, but it is not. Internet of Things has been sitting since 98, since the year 2000, and is basically allowing our systems to talk to each other in a controlled environment. What we've tried to do, and it's a continuous activity in our midterm strategy 2025, is to revolutionize the way we connect our physical objects and also machines. Right? Our strategy 2025 is mainly delivering excellence in the digital world. And this is where we are today. When we have smart sensors that we put on cargo to move, for example, blood samples from the UAE to other parts of the world, that is also provided by a supplier. Now, that supplier has a visibility solution. And then when we put Bluetooth devices in our warehouses to maintain temperature, that also is from another supplier. So internally, what we do is, instead of exposing our information in there, we amalgamate these systems into an IoT platform. Right? That gives us the opportunity to battle the challenges of data storage and analyze the data, and also ensure that they are safe. So from my perspective, this is the way we are working with the Internet of Things, also infrastructures, because we deal with hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers with several different security protocols. So we make sure that we keep it in-house. We put firewalls, we put information security access protocols to ensure that we are controlling this very well. And so far, it's quite great.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tingbani. That's very insightful from the DHL experience. And also, I'm glad to hear that this is a strategic objective, actually, of DHL for, you said, until 2025. Obviously, cybersecurity has been identified as a strategic risk by many industries. So without doubt, it has to be addressed at the strategic as well as operational tactical level. So when we look at then again cyber vulnerabilities and maybe even broader, you mentioned devices, Bluetooth devices that you integrate within your supply chain process and mechanisms. So we are talking about more broader aspect of IoTs or Internet of Things, although many professionals don't even like to use that buzzword. I would like to address then to my fellow colleague, Professor Di Pietro from academia, from university. Professor Di Pietro, what is your view of the main challenges that this integration of IT and OT actually brings, and how to bridge this gap between strategic objectives and tactical operational objectives to maintain the efficiency and create value?
Thank you very much for the question and also for the discussion so far, because it touches several important points that have to be holistically considered in order to achieve a sort of reasonable, viable, and efficient solution. When it comes to the specific question you posed, so the interplay between IT and OT, it's very, very important. I would say it's a cornerstone of cybersecurity for a very simple reason. If we think about the recent attacks that we have seen, and we also discussed them in the introduction, basically the supply chain attack. The supply chain attack are likely looking for the weakest link in the chain. And I believe nowadays that IoT is becoming the weakest link in the chain, because we cannot basically centralize the control for IoT, because there will be billions of that devices around. Think about critical infrastructures. We are working a lot on critical infrastructures. Think about, for instance, an oil field, a big oil field or a refinery for oil, which is very critical. There are like already tens of thousands of IoTs, and in the next 5 years, there will be hundreds of thousands, if not million, because IoT is also a way to automate production, is also a way to automate controls. So it's also a way to have savings and a better response from the industrial point of view. So that's also a big issue, because when you cannot control the perimeter, as we have seen recently, you need to have sort of distributed solutions for securing these devices, because otherwise IoT will be the entry point for next supply chain attacks. Because from the IoT, you can go up in the chain, reaching actually the distributor, and from that point, you can go downwards in spreading your malware. So this is very, very critical. How to secure IoT and what is the interplay with the OT? Basically, it's a very complicated question, because IoT comes with efficiency. From the very beginning, they have been thought to be very efficient. So this means that in terms of hardware, they are very, very limited hardware. There's very limited memory, and sometimes they are just equipped with Bluetooth, because they need to have just the local reach, so they are not connected to the internet. And this is a problem, because you cannot basically analyze the data that are provided by them. You cannot do cross correlation. You cannot perform any intrusion detection system. You cannot run any data analysis tool. You cannot apply in real time or quasi real time any model, machine learning model, or even more static model that you would like to have. So in this regard, there is a clear call for more research and more solutions for IoT, seen as the entry point for the attacker that wants to disrupt the critical systems, critical infrastructures in particular. Think about, as I said, oil fields, but not only that. Think about airports as well. Think about grid. Grid has been, 2016, the Russian attack to Latvia. This system is a very good example. So what could be doing? I mean, it's very difficult to come up with one solution fits all, but I would say that there is the need for having systems that are more robust, ideally anti-fragile, even if it's very difficult, but at least much more robust than they are now. And so this means investing from the very first moment in security, because coming also from the industry, I've been with Nokia and Alcatel-Lucent, I know that security is also a matter of budget. Who's going to pay for the security features? And to this, after many years of experience, I would say that the only solution is for the legislator to intervene and to require a certain degree of security in the solutions that are sold. Otherwise, no one is going to pay. The client is not going to pay because the client wants functionalities, and the security typically is seen as an add-on. It's a mistake, but that's the way it is. The producer wants to sell a product at a very nice price. So this means that security is not added if the client is not willing to pay for it. And at the very end, we end up with systems that are critical but are insecure. I would say that in this regard, there is a very good effort in Europe at large and in the US, and especially in Italy, about trying to secure the devices. Europe is likely pushing for a sort of security certification, which means that basically just the 101 for cybersecurity is done for these devices. And I believe it's not the final solution, but it's a very good way to start, because we have heard, for instance, the HLS strategic program for security, which is good, but then the day-to-day activities of these big players is also at stake when it comes to the interplay between IoT and OT. So to summarize, I will say that it's a very complex field. From research standpoint, we need to work on more robust, if not anti-fragile solution. But the real push to research and to the industry will come if the legislator puts some strict requirements on the devices that are sold, especially for critical infrastructure. I would not call it in terms of certification, but at least in terms of reliability. We need to have sort of blueprint when it comes to security. At these days, we are very far from this objective.
Thank you, Professor Di Pietro. Actually, I'm very glad that you have elaborated on the importance of this regulation and legislation, standardization, and then, of course, the governance, risk compliance, but also through, at the strategic level, partnership with governments, public and private sector, and academia, of course. So that's the whole industry, right? We cannot distinguish one from each other, because otherwise we wouldn't be addressing issue at the strategic level. And you mentioned also something very important, is that there are certain regional factors that are pushing forward. For example, you mentioned some initiatives in Europe. I was actually astonished just a few days ago. I'm based here at the headquarters of the ILO and the rest of the UN in Geneva, Switzerland, and the Federal Office for Energy published the report about cybersecurity resilience in the Swiss energy sector. And that was really horrible results, very worrying, alarming results, actually, that on the scale from 0 to 4, the cybersecurity readiness for the energy sector was just slightly below 1, while their strategic objectives is to reach 2.6. So that's really worrying for the country with such a huge PIB like Switzerland, of course. So what can we expect from countries in development and transition? So I think it's not even at the national level, like you said, it's more at the regional level, but there is also, I think, an important role of standardization, international cooperation, standardization. We've seen a lot of frameworks in different areas. We have an ISO 27019 for energy sector as a standard for securing the energy sector. So I think with your point of view is that we need more of these standards and adoptions, and definitely a minimum governed by regulation that should not be going below the threshold. So maybe now the question to Mr. Surve from VMware. Now, how to stop threats? We are witnessing advanced threats, but also not so advanced threats, but with a huge impact attacking the industry. And we know about weaknesses and vulnerabilities of industries now. How to address these asymmetric threats? Please, Mr. Surve, what can you? tell us.
Thank you, Mr. Victor. So before I answer that question, I was just taking some notes from the panelists in terms of what exactly they were stating and some of the inferences that I derived out of them. First was, as Mr. Habib mentioned, OT has been slow in terms of adoption because they assume that because it's proprietary systems and OEM systems, they don't need to be secure. So that's an assumption that I see because we visit a lot of our customers who operate in this particular, in the energy sector, in manufacturing, and use some of these systems. The most common suggestion that comes out, oh, we are not connected to the internet, so we are safe. That's the basic assumption that comes in. And that reminds me of one of the biggest attacks that we saw on the IoT space, specifically in terms of Mirai, that was done to an IoT security cameras, that were utilized. And as Mr. Samson mentioned earlier, they're using smart sensors for some of these critical infrastructures when they are basically traversing between regions. And if I'm able to get into these sensors and change the parameters or do tweaking of certain things itself, I'm able to jeopardize the whole operation of the organization. So I think a little bit of education is needed on the OT side. That's of paramount importance. They need to understand that OT is equally vulnerable to attacks, the same way as IT. The IT has been in the news, so you get to know it much better because of the number of vulnerabilities and exploits that happen on a daily basis. But when a breach happens in an OT environment, that is more damaging because it hits to the heart of the business organization that it's running in. So that's something that the OT environment or people who are running the OT environment need to be aware of. The second thing that they need to be aware of is OT is not segmented from IT. And as we have, as you said in your introductory statement, with the convergence of big data, cloud computing, 3D printing, augmented reality, all of these components coming in one by one, the convergence of IT and OT is happening at a very rapid pace. And when businesses are moving, they are looking at agility. And they're looking at agility of how fast I can grow my business and what is my time to market. And for those reasons, they would adopt any technology which will help them drive the business much further. And this is being achieved by using AI and machine learning and various technologies that can be brought in quite quickly. And we are seeing this convergence go further. So how do we stop these threats? First foremost is education. Is very, very paramount of importance that the OT individuals who are managing this need to be educated and understand that there are real threats which can jeopardize the business that they are running in. The second thing is, and which we are seeing in the last couple of months, the few attacks that we've seen, be it with the Colonial Pipeline, be it the SolarWinds one, or the recent last week one with Kaseya. No vendor is secure. So you have to select vendors who follow certain, and Dr. Roberto mentioned that very clearly, that follow certain guidelines and certain certifications so that security is intrinsic when they are selling the solution to you as an environment. So you don't need to add on security as a top on to the environment, but it is built in to the solution that you are taking in. That's the second key aspect of this. The third aspect that needs to be there is you need to identify and have visibility across the IT and the OT environment. So typically for the IT environment, we've been having these SOCs that are doing the monitoring part of it. We need to plug in that information now with the convergence of IT and OT coming together to include all the data points that are happening within the OT environment into these SOCs, so that there is a complete monitoring system that exists, whether it's IT or an OT system when it comes to cyber threats. And lastly, is to make sure that the systems are patched up. Now, this is the most basic thing, but a lot of OT environments that we go into, they say, oh, since we are not connected to the internet, we are not vulnerable. Let me not patch my systems up. So whenever the solution provider or the OEM provider is providing a solution, is knowing a vulnerability or an exploit that is happening within the system, making sure that they are applied on time will kind of block some of these attacks that take place in this space.
Thank you, Mr. Surve. That was very, very comprehensive overview of all the sub areas that that organizations and companies need to address to be more effective in addressing the risk and threats. But at the same time, like you said in the beginning, we should not forget that the risk has a dual nature, that the risk is an opportunity as well as a hazard, and this is, I think, in my opinion, always the friction point when we have a convergence of different aspects of industry, where, of course, operational priorities, and looking back into my MBA students, and of course they're creating a value. So of course, without also addressing the risk to that value creation, it wouldn't be efficient and optimized. Now, I think that the key word maybe here, we're talking about optimization. So how to reconcile the objectives in these two worlds together to find the most optimal approach when we're spending resources, and also we are actually addressing priorities when in our tactical but also strategic objectives. So maybe I would quickly ask each panelist to give a final word of wisdom to the audience on this very complex topics. So, Mr. Surve, what would be your message of the day and the key takeaway for our audience?
Yeah, so from my end, it's engagement.
Engagement.
The OT needs to engage in the same manner as IT is doing, and take all the relevant stakeholders across the organization to create a cybersecurity strategy for the organization itself, and it need not be silos of OT being separate than IT itself.
Thank you. And Mr. Tingbani, what is your key takeaway for our audience?
We are only as strong as our weakest link.
Thank you very much.
This is what you should always think about.
This is the mantra for cybersecurity. Well, thank you. Professor Di Pietro, what is your message?
Complexity, because IoT and OT are characterized by an extreme level of complexity, not because of the single elements, which are quite simple, but the intertwining, the interaction, the interdependencies, and the multidisciplinary and also multicultural problem that we have in dealing with cybersecurity these days. So if it's one word, that will be complexity.
Thank you, Professor Di Pietro. And with that, actually, I wanted to share my key message to the audience. So we're talking a lot about technologies. We were talking a lot about processes. We should never forget people. And I think that fits into all these messages here, whether people contribute to the weakest links, whether people contribute to the strongest objectives and outputs and activities to achieve those objectives. We've heard about training and awareness. So when we talk about people, don't forget that people are those that work in the industry to deliver. People also use technologies, but people also attack. So we need to understand our threat actors, their motivation. We need to have threat intelligence, which is very much studied in the cyber defense industry, and it should not be neglected in any other industry, including process controls and industrial controls. And never forget that people have segmented motivations. So sometimes the companies might not be a direct objective of attack, but indirectly used as a vector for attacking some other industries, as we've seen in the colonial pipeline, for example, where the impact rippled through financial industry as well as the overall society. So with that, I think conclude this great panel. Thanks to all the panelists for your very valuable, experienced and professional inputs, and thank you for having us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Viktor.
Thank you, Dr. Polic. Thank you, Samson. Thank you, Tabrez. Thank you, Roberto, for joining us. And definitely thanks to Javed as well, who did chip in at the start of the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you once again. Cheers, everyone.